What kind of ancestor will you be? I first encountered that question 2015, 2016, when my guest at the Crossroads, Richard Josey, posed it. It was his founding precept for this concept that he was launching his own business called Collective Journey. Richard will talk about what kind of ancestor will you be in the interview here. I will say the question inspired a book chapter for a book on being an inclusive museum leader. And it was all about specifically the ancestor I was being to my kids, my daughters Ryan and Tyler. Ryan was just about to launch into college. Richard has then also since come up with a concept that I've stolen, I've borrowed, but it's his, Earth School. That we are constantly learning while we're here on Earth. I love the concept because it gets in mind something so core to the human experience, which is you're never done learning. And I spent my professional life doing that, right, with not just my own writing and publications and those efforts, but working with the institutions in your communities to provide these opportunities to connect. So connection is really important, and Richard is a really vital member of my community and has been for a long time. Richard Josey, Collective Journeys, what kind of ancestor will you be, Earth School, and one of the coolest human beings on the face of the earth. You want to roll into something like the music stuff, or should we roll into history and then get to the music stuff? What are you thinking?
Let's pick up off of the energy from Jazzy Bell.
Okay. So for everybody's benefit, I can't play walk-up music because then I can't get a penny from YouTube. I gotten caught a couple times, but I always play a song when people come on, and I did Jazzy Bell, the Outkast track, and I know Outkast through the song So Fresh, So Clean, which was probably from the last gasp of my time paying any attention to MTV. That was all over MTV, and I thought that Andre 3000 was just one of the smoothest cats I'd ever seen do his thing. I loved everything about it. And I had some understanding, I had a passing understanding of, the Dirty South as this hip hop movement. And, this is the conversation from the crossroads of Southern music history and culture. And whether or not you care for hip hop as music, it is a vital strain of American popular culture that has, from Richard's generation, also mine, has changed music forever. You know why most people that look like me don't like it? It ain't made for us. And that's exactly it. But these are bops, these are songs, and they mean something. What I learned from what little hip hop history I know, the DIY nature of Outkast and Southern hip hop artists of the 90s and 2000s, because hip hop had kind of become this centered between the East and the West Coast, like everything, New York, LA, and these things, but there were these Southerners grinding out, doing things really the Southern way. And I find it, fascinating. And I mentioned to you before, these artists, Outkast in particular, and I want you to talk about this. They represented Southerners in a way that the Allman Brothers represented Southerners 30 years earlier. White Southerners, counterculture. They were speaking of and for the culture, and the culture responded accordingly. And as most anything happens, when the greatness emerges from the South, then they find that its way into the popular culture, etc. So, what we have here for you is let's talk a little bit about the Souths, the Southerners, and like Outkast, how the Dirty South factors into it. First, let's start kind of with there, and you give your props. I want you to give your props to Andre 3000, and also want you to talk about how he feels like he aged out of the genre. I think there's something for us to discuss there, you and me, and this is the conversation from the Crossroads.
Yeah, I'm thinking about like our conversations about Outkast, and I'm realizing that my realizations about Outkast are tied directly to my perception of my own identity. So like in the time frame when they came out, for me, the South was like Texas, so Scarface and the Ghetto Boys and those cats, Luke and the Two Live Crew. They was from Miami, and they predated Outkast. And so for me, and being in Virginia, and some of the conversations we were having around here, it was like, are we really the South? Or are we, will we the South in regards to the Confederacy? But, culturally, when we talk about music, how are we situated? In D.C., there's, we had a lot of go-go that was influencing us there. And then at least in the area that I live in, 7 cities, we every Sunday was Reggae Sunday. And, we have a lot of Jamaicans that are here. And so we were every week. Reggae Sunday was jumping on 103 jams, And so we had this influence from all these different places, and also note at the time frame when that was coming up, when they came out, I was 1 year out of high school. And, and in that high school time frame, everybody always talked about being from New York. The best rappers are from New York, so on and so forth. So when Outkast came out, it just really flipped everything really quickly, because Outkast and their personalities and what they brought and what they talked about and the culture and everything, that more so resonated with us in ways, if we weren't fighting, talking about, I'm from New York, if we wasn't doing that, Outkast was connecting with us at a deeper level, because they were talking about things that we were navigating. Like that gave us, I think for me at least, it helped shape identity. It helped me to see that, yeah, I am from the South, but I'm not limited to that, right? And the other part of it too, man, is just, I'm a 75 baby, and so a lot of the things that drive me is that 70s Black culture, and so when you start looking at the influences that are clearly coming out, from the music, the sample choices, the interpolations of what they playing, that just really spoke to me in the culture, and not just Black Southern culture, but like 70s, and which is another part of my identity. And so as I continue to think about Outkast, for me, and I think for many others, it helped shape our identities at that time. They had a guy who sang named Sleepy Brown, and Sleepy Brown was just dope, man. And even when he came out with a whole album, and then Outkast and Goody Mob and just the whole Dungeon family that really solidified how people saw the South, what they were capable of, and in a bigger context, I think they, their stuff put a shot in the arm of everybody from Virginia on down to Miami, and then going, further out, towards the West, of really understanding we on the map, that we all are part of this sort of culture, and we on the map now.
And this is critical, and I call this show the conversation from the crossroads. The professional term you and I have used often is intersectionality, these various ways that we intersect across the world with ourselves, etc. Like, I am not just a Southern white male, I'm actually a Floridian from a small beach town, rather than thinking about, and I mean, I still consider myself, though, a Southerner, right? Like, all of these things. And, it's interesting, you mentioned Virginia, and did you call it the 7 cities?
Yeah, 7 cities.
So that's the Norfolk, Newport News. Like, what is that?
Exactly. Yeah, that's the Virginia Beach, Norfolk, Portsmouth, all the way through to Newport News.
Okay, and this is very close to Washington D.C. and somewhat attached and connected to the South. I want to talk about go-go because I got a real lesson in this actually earlier this week, last week, with Brian Joyner about DC and go-go, and I did some homework. Mm-hmm. Did not realize that Da Butt is probably the biggest go-go hit there was. But what I want to talk about with go-go is specifically something you just mentioned about that 70s culture that you grew up in and what you feel. The music in that you would have grown up with, right? Got a heavy funk beat. I know George Clinton and P-Funk have some roots up and around that area too. And go-go is funk, but its own specific type of funk that then breaks out very little. It's really a regional sound and culture to the DC area. And then you brought reggae in. And as a South Floridian, reggae is I call it my birthright. I love the reggae beat. You know, my brother, rest in peace. Actually, there's the tat in his honor, was a Marley man, hardcore. And you also have that in your music. And Marley Bob's mother lived in Delaware in the 70s. He visited somewhat regularly in this area where you are. And this melting pot creates this sound that is go-go, and Brian explained it too to me because I knew a lot about the punk rock scene in DC. I just loved that stuff. And he's like, all those guys were all jamming together constantly. The Bad Brains started out as a fusion band before they became the greatest hardcore band in history. And but you add the hip hop element that you specifically get, which is this sound. And I know, it's the Dirty South sound. They recorded in not a basement, but it was basically a crawl space what they do in the South, like they just cut it into the dirt. It's made in the soil of the South, and it's all done on a DIY. They're just making it up as they go along. And like you said, you felt that. You felt all of those connections to what you did.
Yeah. And I think that, the thing that I continue to come back to and think about is the impact that it had on the music, but also what it did for us in terms of, for many of us, where I live, we are surrounded by military bases. So military is a heavy option for youth that grow up in this area. And so many of us who go into the military, then we're traveling elsewhere and we're meeting other people and seeing other people. And you can always, like, I remember I was in the Air Force, and when I got to the duty station, even in boot camp, training camp, and then in my duty station, I always had an affinity for people that said y'all, right? When somebody would, be riding down the street or whatnot, like, I made friends and connections based off of the music that they were listening to, because that was an entry point to, oh, you from North Carolina? What part of North Carolina? Oh, where? My homeboy is stationed down there, right? And so there's something interesting about how the music isn't just music, but it's also kind of a hub for how we see each other and how we come together and connect. And most of the cats that I hung out with when I was in the military, for example, which is around that time frame when Outkast was big, it was we get ready to go to the NCO club, and so you can hear Outkast up and down the barracks hallways, everybody playing it, different songs and whatnot, because it was something that brought all of us Southerners together. Like it was something that allowed all of us to feel comfortable singing that we're Southerners.
Yeah. The South is such a cool and mysterious place, and you and I are both from here in different parts of the South. We're obviously of different races, even though race is a bullshit concept, but you're black, I'm white. We are pretty much the same age. We're 4 years apart. I'm 4 years older, but we have so many of these similar experiences, and this kind of fraught understanding of the South. Fraud is maybe the wrong word, but we understand and love its complexity, love it for its complexity. And then I love Southerners for what we share when we're together. There's a real goodness to it. And I find it in music. Like, again, my jam is the Allman Brothers, and they were an integrated band. That's in 1969. That's not a small thing ever. That's right. Something to look at and say, hey, I want to do something like that, and the same sort of thing when any culture or music scene emerges, all of a sudden y'all are all listening to it. You realize kind of how easy it is. One of the greatest things about hip hop from the beginning, right, is how easy it is to do it without a band. Right. You need a record and a microphone. That's really where it starts. And the equipment that you use to make it. And like you said, they were using samples from the era that hit really hard for you. Mm-hmm. And that's also a part because they were feeling it too, right? This is like, why aren't we doing this to that extent? Talk about South a little more on that part. Like, let's move to that. Go finish up, and then let's talk about South.
Well, I'm continuing to talk about the South, but there's something that I think is super important when we're talking about outcasts, but also just it's almost like I think of outcasts as they planted a seed that when their music came out, it was like they put the battery in everybody down here, especially around music, into the fact of and understanding how they doing it. It's like, yo, like I got a closet. I got some blankets. Like all we need is a mic. Like we started thinking about what did it meant to, like, yo, we could do this in the house. I'm sitting here looking at my machine studio last night because I was working on stuff and sampling and whatnot, and just thinking about, you know, like the fact that I've done music and I felt like I could do music because that there was a seed that was planted, and they were the seed for a lot of us. Because after that time frame when they came out, then I started to notice, especially by the time I came back home, which was like 97. By the time I got home, like everybody had little home studios that had popped up, and everybody's doing mixtapes, and they're putting them out on the street. And you go to 7-Eleven and you find somebody out there, you know, wanting to pass you their CD. And you started hearing more of that Southern drawl and that vibe, you know, coming out of the music. And so I think it's important to also just realize the impact that two men or a group of men had on a whole culture. Like what came after them, you know, the T.I.s, I can't even begin to name, you know, like Ninth Wonder, who's making stuff, like all of these folks that came out afterwards that have done amazing things and are still out in the industry doing stuff, all point back to the rise of the South from Outkast.
Yeah, if you could, let's talk mixtape for a second, because in the white people parlance, in my culture, a mixtape is something you give a girl because you want her to listen to all these tracks and, you know, or whatever. Right. Maybe you trade with friends. But in hip hop culture, it is, I'm putting my stuff out there on the street so you can get it. And you're giving it away or selling it. And then people pick it up and either add that sample to their stuff. Talk to me about explain that part of that, because, and is that a post-Outkast thing, or was it happening even a little bit before then?
Got you. So thinking about mixtapes, so when we talk about mixtapes, it's basically a couple of different ways. There could be a local DJ who took a bunch of music from a bunch of different artists and scratched them together and mixed it and talked over it, you know, reminiscent of DJ Clue and Who Kid and, you know, some of those guys from up north. So that's one means as to how our mixtapes look. But then oftentimes the mixtape was really about, I don't have no theme for this album. I just got 16 tracks that I did that I rapped over. I don't have no hooks. It's just raw. And I'm going to put it all together and I'm going to give it to people. I might ask people for a donation. I might try to charge people $5. Like, one big name, Southern culture, is Master P.
Okay.
A lot of us talk about Master P. Master P was selling CDs out of his trunk prior to getting big. That was part of him getting his music out to people and getting a buzz so that he could get on. And so a lot of people here were navigating in those same sort of areas. And we also had, you know, we had our own little the mixtape culture is kind of interesting because it kind of parallels some of the things of the industry culture. So in the industry, when artists were battling each other and going back and forth, but it was going back and forth battling, here in the streets, in the neighborhood, on mixtapes. So some of the cats that I was doing work for and was and recording and whatnot for, there was a period of time when I had one group come in and they talking about another group that was coming in the next day, and it was just like a roundabout mixtapes talking about each other. There was like constant Drake and Kendrick and Drake beefs happening all the time. But it uplifted how how people were heard. So some people got on, off of that. And so I don't know. It's the mixtape culture was super dope, and it was a very connected way. Like you think of Spotify playlists, a playlist, put it on a CD. It's your music, and you are giving it to people or selling people.
Right.
But oftentimes it began by having a DJ. Like if it was a DJ on there, okay, it's mixed. It's a mixtape. But then it evolved into just a collection of songs.
Okay. Quickly, I'm still getting the distortion from you, just to let you know. We can keep it'll be all right. And I'm gonna do some posts on this. My daughter does it, Ryan. So I'll say this for other folks. I've been hustled in Times Square with guys trying to pass their mixtapes on to me and charge me money. And it's like, dude, I don't want your shit, but that's what they're doing. They're trying to get their music out. I will liken it to, the culture of what we call jam bands now that allow taping. And this is something the Grateful Dead allowed in earnest beginning in the 80s. The Allman Brothers did it as well. But the idea is saying all of our music is here for you to have. You just set up your microphones. You can record these bootlegs and share them. And that's a great way to share what we're doing.
Right.
And it's so for, to sort of connect it back to the bottom line, though, is the idea that music has become super accessible, that Outkast, these artists from your part of the world, from your region, are making music and inspiring you guys to make music as well. And it becomes, like you said, a part of your identity. Right. Having some sense of pride of place or pride of self is a very good thing. I think keeping that pride, that within reason, obviously, right? I say that in this particular period of time where it's 2026. I'm not laying this out as timely. The shit show is still going on, just for everybody's benefit. It's April 2026, and we're not talking about anything more than that. But the bottom line is, though, I do believe, with my whole heart, that the only way out of this nonsense, right, is the idea of community, of shared spaces, of giving a little to gain a lot. Right. And I don't know that that's necessarily a Southern thing any more than it's any other region of the country. But Southern music in and of itself has often been the communal experience. That's a black culture, that's a white culture, that's everybody in the South. The music that, I gravitate to, right, is what blues and jazz being the true music that was completely invented by Americans. And in a lot of ways, hip hop mirrors jazz, but it is also, it's not as bluesy a medium. And again, we're going to move off hip hop because I'm sure some people have turned off, but I don't want to hear about this shit. But, you should, because it's a vital representation of culture. And honestly, the story of Outkast and the story of that Southern musical movement of which you are part of parallels exactly the story of the Allman Brothers. They refused to leave the South. They weren't going to go to New York, go to LA, go to Chicago to try to make it. They were staying where they were comfortable. They were making music in their home town of Macon, Georgia, or down in Miami, Florida, where they were all from. And I think that's really important. And the fact is, Outkast and then this movement you are a part of became guys in the South and all over, but we're going to talk about South today, who then start putting their own pastiche together. Mm-hmm. And yours involves go-go and reggae because that is a part of that culture a specific part of the culture that you're from.
Mm-hmm. There's one last thing I'll say about the South, and for me, I this thinking about the South, thinking about Outkast, thinking about the role that it had in terms of how I navigate identity, has been something that I've been thinking about lately, because what it did also teach me was that identity isn't neutral, right? When I go to certain places and I have that, I don't consider myself having a Southern drawl, but if I say y'all, then it's not just the words that I say, but it's also what meaning somebody takes out of it. It's
Right.
layered. This sort of Southern identity is inherited, so people would navigate me based off of their associations of what the South meant. And a lot of times I didn't question it even for myself in thinking about it, and so I'm thinking about specifically time that I was in Minnesota, particularly, and I'm just continuing to think about, like, as we think about identity and being this Southern, is that something that I've inherited, or is it something that I'm choosing to show up within? It's something that I'm continuing to think about. Like, we say Southern folks are X, Y, and Z. So am I choosing that I have to be X, Y, and Z, or am I creating a path, for me? And so something that I think about a lot, especially when I see young people navigating, and because now their exposure to the bigger world is different than what we had. Now they've got the internet and TikTok and so on and so forth, and so what it means to be Southern is shifting. Also,
You and I are children of the civil rights movement. I only went to integrated schools beginning in 1976. So for us, we inherited. We didn't know anything else, right? We just knew that environment, as awkward as it probably was for you at different times, and also for me, but in wholly different ways. That's a really interesting question about do I inherit? Is the label inherited? What parts of the label do I associate with and disassociate with?
right.
Oh boy, I've spent a lot of time thinking about that shit, man. You and I have spent hours discussing this over 20 years, man. Just me unpacking my own thing. I'll give you a quick one. My grandmother, rest in peace, Mama, my dad's mom, one time told me, you should cultivate a Southern accent. She told me to cultivate a Southern accent. Now, my dad didn't really have one. My uncle did. She did. She had a very genteel Southern accent. But really none of the rest of us got it. And y'all became like the one thing that I carried with me. But I choose to take some of those things about the South that I like. Its music, its culture. I do think, I don't think the South is inherently good or inherently bad. I love Southerners for the things they understand. I also can't stand Southerners for the way they typically vote. I disavow myself from that side of things. And the other one, is my past, my lost cause understanding of the American Civil War. What I was taught as a Southerner, and I was taught this, not in school. I'm a generation after that. You might have been taught it because it was still in Virginia textbooks when you were in elementary school. But that the war was not about slavery, that enslaved people were happy, didn't want to be freed. The war was about states' rights or tariffs and all this. And, I was taught that. My grandmother was a member of the United Daughters of the Confederacy. And I pushed back against that the second I understood, wait a second. And I've been fighting that ever since, through learning about what the civil rights movement is. And I don't know if you heard the conversation I did with Ahmaud Ward a couple weeks ago, but we went in depth on my enlightenment. I talk about history as liberation a lot. People are scared of these quote unquote negative aspects of our history. But when I think about the civil rights movement, I think about Fred Shuttlesworth emerging from a bombed out house with a bump on his head and being more determined to fight for civil rights than less. That is inspirational to me about you can write segregation laws, but you can't stop people from seeking freedom.
Yeah. There's something I wanted to chime in on from what you're saying, and is the idea of people being afraid of like tough stories, tough history. And I just wrote a piece 2 days ago as I was thinking that through. And I was working with a client recently, and one of the things that they said that the therapist had been talking to them about was sitting with their feelings, sitting with their emotions. And she said, "Richard, what the hell is she talking about?" She said, "Sit with your feelings. What does that mean?" And I've been kind of navigating that since I started, you know, from the trainings to now coaching. And I don't think the issue is that the stories become difficult when we don't know how to manage our emotions through them. And so,
Elaborate.
right? So if I don't know what it means to sit with this emotion, like if I'm angry, if I don't know how to sit with that and navigate that, then I'm just going to say anything and I'm going to do anything. And I'm going to live that belief because that's me. That's my identity. And what I've been really pushing and thinking about more is like how we were saying earlier about like the stories that run in our heads. Like we are beautiful creators of stories. We create some amazing stories. And many folks are walking around with stories that they don't share with others. It's a story that they tell about themselves. And so I don't want to go too far off track, but I think there's something to be said about how we navigate, how we can disrupt those harmful stories that we tell ourselves about the past or even about ourselves by being able to sit with the emotions that cause us to behave based off of what we feel.
I mean, that's like something an individual has to decide for themselves they're going to do, right? Like, because like that is certainly the case. I'm not going to say the flaw, but that's essentially the case. Uncomfortable with your own emotion, right? I think what we're talking about here a bit, and I mean, I use this term a lot, history as liberation. History was liberating to me to hear the struggles of African Americans during Reconstruction. What I was taught was an abject failure, okay? A failure of policy, failure of everything else, right? To hear those stories when I encountered them my first semester of graduate school in 1997, or to read about the civil rights movement when everything is at stake for people. I can sit here and go to a protest if I want to. Really, nothing's at stake for me. I'm probably not going to get hurt. Not going to get arrested. Not going to lose my job. But I'm fascinated by the Black freedom story, the Black liberation story. It's an awesome model, and it's just rich with layers.
Mm-hmm.
But if I'm taught, right, which I was, that there was a negative, black history was somehow a negative or not enough or something like that. Like then I come to Black history, or what we would call maybe difficult history, fearful of what you're saying. I come to it fearful. So how do we break that? How do we, as humans? I'm not talking about like on an institutional level, but as humans, how do we? And then of course, how do you do that without, me, and boundaries, without compromising on your self, whatever that means.
I mean, that's Earth School, right?
Ha ha ha! Well played, sir.
Right? That's Earth School. Earth School is the idea that, at the core, it's embodying this understanding that we're here to learn. That every interaction, everything that we're facing, the hard moments, the beautiful moments, it's about us learning to be. And in some cases, it's relearning. It's redefining. It's seeing the world. It's understanding that everything that we're navigating is an opportunity to learn and to grow and to develop. I think, for me, when I was getting on the bus to go to MEPS to get ready to fly out to boot camp, and I remember my mom came up, she came to me and she hugged me. She had tears in her eyes. She kissed me on the cheek. And she looked at me and she said, "You're a man now. You're a man." And I took that message and I thought I was a man. And I went out and did what I thought men do. Right and wrong. Right? Earth School for me is reminding myself that my belief of what I thought a man was what I thought when I was 18. I'm 50. That there's been growth. There's been learning. There's a shift that I made from being just certain about what everything is supposed to be like to being curious. And the more curious that I am, the more I find my language shifting, the more that I start to just navigate a lot of things differently, and I don't feel locked in to being what everybody else defines for me. And that was so freeing. My 16-year-old daughter, and I'll stop there. My 16-year-old daughter just did a poem for a poetry contest. We didn't even know she started doing poetry just recently. And all of a sudden she's joined with a group. And the group that she was in, they won first place. And I don't know what she did, individually. But the whole poem that she did was about pressure and it was like this realization that she's coming to that in her Earth School, everything is about learning rather than trying to be perfect. And that's my 16-year-old saying this.
Yeah, that's out of the mouths of babes right there.
Right? I never said this when I was 16, and I'm seeing more and more young people who are kind of just asking themselves questions and rethinking what it is that they've inherited, that they've just been mindlessly doing, and what does it mean to, as you said, look at history and use history as a means of being liberating. I really love that idea. That's from the field of history, but I also think it's applicable when we start talking about individual people's histories.
I honestly think most people can relate to people struggling for freedom. I think that it is it's when you can humanize the concepts, which is, Richard did the Earth School. I'm going to say every time I say the term Earth School on this show and in private, people's eyes light up because you can understand the concept that you're never done. I think life, it's soul praise. We are here to serve others. That is becomes very clear to me over a lifetime. Do I always do it? No. Do I seek to keep going in that direction? Yes. This show is an outgrowth of that for me because I feel like I know a lot of really good people who think so deeply about the world and making it better in some way, or just shining a light or saying, "Hey, check this out. My dad used to sit and read the newspaper. Here's something interesting." And everybody had to stop and listen to him. Now, 12 years after his death, I miss that very much, Right. But in 2012 or so, it annoyed the crap out of me. But the point being, inculcating this sense of curiosity, which for me, professionally, you professionally, we're historians. I mean, we are in that space professionally. And there's no way to do it in the ways that we've done it. We spent our careers in museums, historic sites, etc. There's no way to do it and not be curious and learn. It's just the only right way to do it. But it ain't that hard to do it as a normal human, whether going to a coach, a therapist, reading a book, going to a museum, whatever that may be. The idea that you're not done, that learning is a part of the process. And yeah, I will say, for your 16-year-old's sake, that probably reflects, not probably, that's going to reflect on you. And I mean, there's some DNA there, but there's also some nurture. This is who her dad is and the things that he does. And, you know, I see my own kids dabbling in a similar world that we do. And it's, you know, sometimes they'll say something, you'll be like, yeah, I did my job, you know. Like, I'll give you one that I probably shared with you before, but you've probably forgotten. Before Ryan, who's now 24, went away to her sophomore year of college, summer of, let's say, 2021. Tough time, man, summer 2021. That was a tough season. And she said, you know, you and Mama live really fulfilled lives, and I want that. And I was like, you know what? Mic drop, man. I just stay on that path. I'm not saying follow your bliss and all that crap, because there's just no magic way to do it. But staying curious, sharing what you're doing with others, and not shutting down, you know, those are all important. And like I said, Earth School, man, I say it. If you're like, Earth School, I like it.
Yeah, and the one just one addition, you know, the thinking back to my 16-year-old, like, you know, I want to big up, you know, like the community that she has around her, and me and her mother, the communities that we had around us, and the community that me and her mother, you know, formed, you know, to raise this child. We're not together in terms of a relationship. We're together in terms of ensuring that this beautiful child of ours is armed and equipped to exist in a world that's different than the one we were in. And that takes a lot to, you know, sort of. I was telling somebody recently, like, raising kids. I found that raising, you know, my daughters, for example, it's really been about giving them a reference point for how to be, how to think, how to manage your emotions. You know, what we call soft skills. Those are the skills that are the absence of those skills cause the disruption that we see. You know, oftentimes it's Earth School is that lifelong learners on steroids. Like, it's just constant. And your point is well taken in terms of, like, part of that Earth School is understanding my boundaries and how I navigate those and who the boundaries are for. The first time when I built up boundaries, my boundaries were they were rooted in how much I distrusted people who had harmed me. You know, coming out of that, then my boundaries were, I got to have some fortifications because I need to figure out, because I need to create this so that I can be safe. And then I got to a point of realizing, yeah, no, what I really did was put up boundaries, and I kept the safe and the harmful one insulated inside me, right? And so when I freed myself, I feel like, from just the incessant, constant stories that I'm telling myself and how I was beating myself up and so on, when I kind of freed myself out of it, then I realized that the boundaries that I need are just the boundaries that I have now are just about rooted in how I feel. I know what it feels to just feel peace and comfort. I know how that feels in my body. And so now anytime that I'm interacting with somebody, I don't have to worry about whether I trust you or not, because I trust me. And I know what my body feels like when I'm with you. And that doesn't, and if my body feels off, that doesn't mean you're a bad person. It just means that we're not the right people to intersect right now. I'll catch you on the next line. Right? And so it is that through that sort of process and that mindfulness and awareness that's really helped me stop being on autopilot and rest for a moment and feel this. And now everything looks different. And it's these kind of conversations I've had with her mother and with her, with my 20 plus year old and the grandbabies and the people around me. And the same way that Outcast was a seed that drew up all this other stuff, I think we as individuals can be seeds for others to give people a reference point, a different reference point for what it could be.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought boundaries back up because I will share, and I think you know this, my boundaries are, I've got some pretty big ones. And the biggest one for me this day and age, and it's been the last, is on a rhetorical standpoint. I'm a very highly trained rhetorician after 2 graduate degrees in history, and to get yelled at with talking points, which is what used to happen to me on social media and happens sometimes when you interact with people, which I think that's what's gotten us to this kind of problem that I see in this country about the divisions are very real. And there's a whole bunch of us are saying, hey, we just don't want to be assholes anymore. Can we stop being just instinctively assholes? And so I have, like, my strongest one is probably a no asshole policy, which goes back to, if you're going to argue with me, try to, and bring up your 9th grade economics teacher or your freshman year in college economics professor who both said something you agreed with, and you haven't examined that concept anymore beyond that point, you're bringing a rhetorical knife to a rhetorical gunfight, bringing a knife to a rhetorical gunfight. And, I've had to, like, I recognize how I sound when I say that, but it's like, this is my expertise, parsing information and making sense of it is legit like my highest expertise. And it's like, I am not going to get in the mud and argue with you because, as Lyndon Baines Johnson famously said, and others have said, don't get in the mud with a pig. You're both going to get dirty and the pig likes it, So, I have boundaries on those things. Like we are not going to, for example, pretend the Civil War wasn't about slavery. Like, right. If that is where you begin, or you're going to say states' rights, and you can't answer a state's right to do what, then you are not somebody I'm going to have a conversation with about the Civil War and Civil War memory. Like, I'm the wrong person to do that. Like you said, the energy is not going to be right for me because I'm not either have to eat a lot more shit than I really want to, and bite my tongue, or I'm gonna really bring it, and I don't want to do that because it's not nice. I just want to be nice.
Right.
So I'm really glad you brought up boundaries at the tail end of that. That was important because you don't have to accept everything people are throwing at you. You don't. And we're trying to build community ultimately with people we want to be in community with.
Right.
My job isn't to heal the broken or the unwashed. My job is to hang out with my job for myself is to be around the good energy that I enjoy and try to spread as much of it as I can, Yeah. That was,
Well said.
Yeah. Thank you. So go ahead.
I just want when I say well said, I'm saying you're given the sort of duality of that it is, I'm surrounding myself with the good energy while also being good energy for others. And that's super important. And I appreciate you saying that because I think sometimes we miss one of those. Sometimes we get into a space where I just want to be good energy and I can change people. I ain't changing nobody.
Yeah.
So I'm going to surround myself with good energy and just be who I am. Okay, well, that's not helpful to the people. There has to be that duality of good energy around you and also being good energy as well. And we don't that doesn't just happen. That is part of Earth School. We grow to understand that.
Excellent way to bring it back on the Earth School, because that's exactly what it is. Understanding your limits. And then a lot of us come from somewhat traumatic. We have trauma in our background. I think everybody does. This isn't a trauma dump or anything else, but for me, I have some really strict boundaries based on how I was treated by my sibling, by my sister. That, like legit, if I were to explore it deep in therapy, it'd be like, yeah, you're just not going to do that to me. I don't care what we share beyond that. That is just not how I'm going to be talked to or dealt with or whatever else. I can get kind of heated about this one, and I don't mean to. It's just a matter of, like, that's the number one thing I could teach anybody out there is, you don't have to having boundaries doesn't make you a bad person. It makes you protecting yourself from harm or potential harm. And I'm not here to, like you said, I am not here to convert. I am preaching to those who are willing to be, willing to hear, let them with ears hear about goodness, community, these sorts of things as best I can.
Yeah.
I've made a intentional decision with this platform that I have, as small as it is, to start talking about more goodness. So can we move to good ancestors?
Sure.
Let's
Sure.
do it. So Richard came up with a concept. He's wearing the shirt. Can you stand up so we can see it? Although this will also be audio. What kind of ancestor will you be? And I will say, I wrote a book chapter on this in 2021, about the same time actually that my daughter was going off to school. Oh no, I think it was in October of 2020, with that title, because it made me think. And Richard's kind of built an entire business around this concept of collective journeys, this concept of belonging, which comes out of his work in diversity and inclusion, something I stand for like nobody's business. DEAI is important to me. Inclusion is important to America. It's important to democracy, and it's really important to community. Earth School, good ancestors. These are how I look at the world, and they're because you introduced me to the concepts. So let's talk about good ancestor. What kind of ancestor will you be, and how that fits into collective journeys? If you want to go there now, we'll bring it up later.
No, I was in a meeting in Minnesota, and I was working for the Minnesota Historical Society, and we were working with what we call the Dakota Community Council. So it was a group of Dakota family and community members that we were partnering with, and we were in a meeting and we were navigating some tough conversations, and there was an elder named Dave Lewis who stood up in the meeting and he said, in every deliberation we have to ask ourselves, what kind of ancestor will we be? For in every conversation, every decision that we make will last us for 7 generations. So what kind of ancestor will you be? And I was just done, because that was, for me, the missing link that I felt as it related to history.
The work we do in history. That's because y'all got to say, like, again, he's in a professional boardroom, Minnesota Historical Society, one of the largest, best funded, phenomenal organization that has done a lot locally and nationally. And it's a bastion of local history, of state history. And you're saying the connection happened there. So continue. I just wanted to throw that in there to clarify that moment.
Yeah. So I am being clear, I am a vessel for something that was shared with me. And I've had a couple conversations with him, because I would not dare begin to talk as publicly with shirts and whatnot without his head nod, his agreement. And so in that conversation, and we talked a bit more, it just helps me understand. This is a question that I ask myself all the time. This is a question that my work is rooted in. Every day I'm asking myself that question. Sometimes it's just in the morning as part of a meditation. Sometimes it's in a meeting where things are getting tense, and I'm asking myself, what kind of ancestor do I want to be? And the answer to that is it speaks to, okay, well, if I want to be this type of ancestor, then my response needs to be like this. I can't be sarcastic. I can't give them the same energy that I feel like they're giving me. This is all air school still, right? I need to, that prompt that I ask myself, it signals responsibility. It signals legacy. We're called to this work for a variety of different reasons. And for me, it wasn't just about talking about the past. It was about how are we curating our future with a mind towards what the past has shown us. So this question is I love it, because it moves us not just into the funk that we're dealing with now, but beyond that. And so if we look beyond the funk that we're dealing with, that should help gauge how we deal with the funk we have now. because we're creating along the way. Um, and now I've got products. I got these shirts selling in museum stores. I've been riding on Interstate 64 and stopped at a rest area and saw somebody on with one that they bought from the African American Museum in Philadelphia. Um, so it's just like it's just really exciting to see not just the sales, but the conversations that it builds. Because when I go travel, I got one of these on or a T-shirt, and I'm always having conversations. People just randomly say, I think one that's mindful and careful, and or they'll just say any random and I've met so many people at so many places with this on. So
These are concepts that are very core to me. Earth School, collect. What kind of ancestor will I be? They were there before I knew you. You have given voice to the term, to the terms, or some framework there for it. Something else though that you have introduced me to, or we've spoken a bit about, is the concept, the African American / African concept of ancestors. As much as you want to unpack that for me, honestly, we have spoken about it briefly, but there's a deeper connection to Black America and African, specifically Africa, that goes with this.
Yeah, this concept of Sankofa. Sankofa. We reach back to capture what was lost along the way. That's going to be helpful and useful for us to move forward. For me, I think about the ancestors in specific and in broad ways. So I oftentimes think about, specifically about, ancestors in my lineage that came before me, while also simultaneously thinking about ancestors more broadly, those that fall outside of the bloodlines. And so it's always an interesting exercise for me, because the way that I navigate with ancestors is that everywhere I go, my ancestors are with me. No one is truly gone unless they're forgotten. The ancestors that came before me, I remember them. I remember the stories and the things that I've read and the feelings that I felt. And those things are core to kind of how I navigate and move through, even today. Later on today, I'll be writing a report to send to a client, right? So I'm going to sit and have an internal conversation with myself, navigating through the things that the ancestors have taught, what I've learned from them, and that will help me determine what words I use, how I flow, just how I navigate through any of that stuff. When I think about parenting, and I'm a granddad now, so as I'm thinking about those things, I'm thinking about the ancestors. I'm channeling, sort of what I've gained from my awareness and my relationship with my grandparents and great grandparents. But also, it's also other people's parents and grandparents. Like, I'm doing some things with my grandkids now that wasn't necessarily done from my blood lineage, but was from ancestors more broadly, right? I come from a mindset that we are all like puzzle pieces that forgot that we make up one puzzle, that we're all connected. And so from that core foundational understanding, it allows me to kind of have those two ancestral understandings coexist at the same time. One that's my blood lineage, Lee's, Josie's, Robert's, that whole line, but then also looking at ancestors more broadly. Because I do come from a foundational belief that we are all connected. We are all relatives. And that was also what made my time amongst the Dakota so beneficial. Was it? I already had that belief, and when I sat with them, they're like, "No, we all are relatives." It's like, cool, I'm with it. What's going on, bro?
Bringing it back to music just very quickly, I've told you this before, that the two cultures that are most connected with the earth is the African culture and the Native American culture. And they are both cultures, the drum is an essential way that they connect. Rhythm is vitally important to certainly the African culture, so much so that they, took it away from the enslaved people. Like, drums were a threat for Native peoples, it is part of their traditions, more simple ceremonies, simple drum things. But the heartbeat, the rhythm, grounding you to the earth, like it is a legit concept that comes from, and it makes sense, right? That you would be like, yes, of course, this is, where it comes from. It's that whole, I'd like to buy the world a Coke, right? It's, the brotherhood of man thing. But
Right.
yeah, like,
Right.
I mean, I'll just say, like, why else are we here? Like just to be like selfish and be, like that's Gollum. That's Gollum in the Lord of the Rings. Like you have a treasure and all you do is sit there and just like you turn into this monster. And like one of the most important historic sites to me, Richard, is called Bok Tower Gardens in Lake Wales, Florida. Lake
Mm-hmm.
Wales being ground zero for where the Beatties got to Florida.
Right.
Bok Tower is a legit tower built by a man named Edward Bok, who was an immigrant from the Netherlands and became incredibly successful in America. And he built it as this homage to that success in the 20s or 30s, something like that. Glorious gardens on the highest point of peninsular Florida. And I learned the first time I went, and it stuck with me forever, was essentially this philosophy he had about make the world a better place because you were in it. And, again, this is the thread we are talking about, right? Like when you voiced good ancestors or Earth School, right? It points me back to something like that, which has been a philosophy for me, again, I sound like I'm some Pollyanna or some great human. I do a lot of shitty stuff, right? But I do try to keep myself going, in that direction. So we've done Earth School, we've done good ancestors. I don't want to let you go before we talk a little bit about your experience interpreting slavery as a teenager. I kind of pussyfooted around this the last couple of times we talked about it, but I'm going to say to you, and say to everybody, Richard was a teenage interpreter at Colonial Williamsburg, which is history nerds Disneyland. One of the greatest things I ever did was visit there in eighth, ninth grade, I forget what. And was one of the earliest, if not the earliest places like that to start interpreting Black history. It wasn't just about the prettiness of the revolution and the revolutionary era. I mean, I go back to something we discuss a lot. Representation is really important. And the reason I know this is because they wouldn't take the pride flag down from Stonewall, or they wouldn't stop allowing people free admission on Martin Luther King Day in America right now, 2026. The Trump administration did this. If representation wasn't an issue, if representation wasn't somehow a threat to, in this case, I'm going to say fascism. But it's a threat to people who are trying to divide us. I will flat out say that. Like representation is a threat to that. So let's talk. I don't want you to unpack all your trauma, but obviously you've stuck it out in this field from the entire time. And I want to say flat out, for everybody's benefit, the impact of portraying an enslaved person on anybody is got to be an emotional roller coaster. And I respect that a lot of friends, Richard included, who have done this. But as a kid, that's a whole nother ballgame, because that's a big thing for a kid to wrap his head around.
Gotcha. You asked about Williamsburg, and so I started working in Williamsburg in 1985. I was 10. And, Colonial Williamsburg had just started, sort of an African-American interpretations and presentations department. I think the first group came in 1979. So you go six years after that. And 6 years after that, I was part of the second or third round of kids that had come in. So there were some who had gone, through the program before me. But we were getting trainings. We were taking tests. We had to test in order to present to the public, and you had to pass the test in order to present to the public. We're costumed, and we took on interpretation of the lives of African and African American children, particularly within the greater context of African American history. Um, Sometimes those were scripted roles when we were always generally in costume. Sometimes they were scripted roles that we did where we were portraying kids of the time, and other times it was interpretation. Facilitation, interpretation, like you see on the streets. It was it was really interesting to me because for me there was that allowed me to see the greater diversity of Black people, from outside of my family. Now I'm meeting people from Richmond. I'm meeting Rex and Christy and folks who lived in the area. But for me, they were different. They were different type of folks than what I had come in contact with.
Your co-workers, for everybody's benefit, Rex Ellis, he's talking about two people we know real well, Rex Ellis and Christy Coleman, his co-workers.
Yeah.
Older co-workers, a couple Christy's maybe 10 years older than you, and Rex maybe 15, a little older, something like that.
But but seeing them, I mean, a lot of them, now we have, now I'm coming in contact with more and more people who are coming from academia, and who've been to Hampton. Like I got people in my family who go to Hampton, Virginia State, Norfolk State. But this was like constant, and in the work environment, and so, I was very shy, quiet. I ain't want to talk. I like the idea of meeting new people, but I ain't, I wasn't really about meeting people, right? I was just so shy, and it's through, that as well as I sang in the choir, which is crazy. I'm shy, but I also was a choir boy, and so all of the combination of those things kind of really made me tap into what I'll say is the extrovert version of me. But it also, that work wasn't just about work. It was about life. Like I experienced what it meant to be raised by a village. Because I had it at home, in the neighborhood, and then I also had it at work. And if I was to cut up or act up, then they was gonna tell my grandma when my grandma picked me up. I wasn't even aware at the time as to how connected so many people were. My mama know so-and-so's people, and know so-and-so people. Like I didn't realize that some of these people we're actually related to. And so the Colonial Williamsburg work really was a part of me kind of figuring out who I am, what I want to do. To the point that when I graduated, I went into the Air Force, and I remember sitting at a base, Lowry Air Force Base, which was in Denver, Colorado at the time, watching TV and watching CNN talk about this estate sale, the slave auction that Colonial Williamsburg was doing, and seeing Christy Coleman and Rose McAfee and Emily James, people that I knew on TV doing the work. And I'm at my AIT, my training school, and I'm ready to go back home because I want to go back and work with them. I want to be with my people. And oddly enough, I think one of the big reasons why I left, why I didn't stay in the military after the 4 years, is because I wanted to come back, and that part of me wanted to come back and do this work. So, my time at Williamsburg was stupid impactful, just in my development, but also the way I see the work and also the way I see the world.
It clearly, inspired a lifelong career. Why? Explain to everybody why it was so important that Williamsburg start telling this story. And I know some of the folks who were instrumental in getting that started. Denny O'Toole is one of them, one of our mutual mentors. But I mean, I can tell you why representation is important, but why at that stage is it important?
Williamsburg, capital city of the largest of the colonies. 52.6% of that population was Black. So the largest, and you know, some of these folks at the forefront of this revolution, the colonies, the colony that was the home of Jefferson and Washington, all these great, you know, founders that we speak of, that in the capital city, every other face that they would have seen would have been that of an enslaved man, woman, or child. And for an organization like Colonial Williamsburg that has that responsibility of that story, it was important for them to not tell half the story and pretend like they're telling the whole one. This was also, to be clear, something that the Denny O'Tools and the Kerry Carsons and, you know, and some of the others, those young guys coming out of some of these Ivy League schools with this information and this focus and this emphasis, they're a part of why the story is being told. Why it's still prominent. You know, why it became a thing. Why it was important to do that. And again, it's 79, so, you know, thinking back to that time frame, you know, we roots. You know, we start seeing socially more and more coming out around African American history and culture. And so surely there's a sort of there's a finance, you know, aspect to it. Like, we could do this, right? Like, that part is there. But I know the folks that was up on the early end, and their push wasn't about finance. It was about truth telling. It was about reckoning and acknowledgement.
I think, you know, exactly what you said. That it's an incomplete history if you only include 48% of the population and the part of the population that had all of the power.
Right.
You know, remembering 52% are enslaved. They have no vote. They have no right to education. No right to movement, etc. And, you know, this started, I've studied this a bit, you know, a bit of a groundswell in, you know, across the nation. And I think you're right. A lot of it comes from roots. A lot of it comes out of the fever of the bicentennial, where a whole bunch of communities started grabbing on to their local history. You know, I always call it a little bit of a bait and switch. A big anniversary is a great way to get some attention for what you're doing, and sort of give them something real, you know, something more tangible, whatever else. But to get the attention, you know, a lot of the museums I've worked with and for, a lot of the small museums in this country kind of have an origin in and around, or a re-origin around this time period, you know, of the middle 1970s, et cetera. And, you know, like I say, representation matters, right? Not only because it's the right thing to do, but people need to see themselves in history. They need to see themselves. And look, you're looking at my face. I mean, hell, most of the dollar bills look like me, you know, like most of the, you know, like, I saw myself in every history book, in every book, you know, there. History as liberation, back to that wonderful theme there, recognizing that, you know, I am standing on the shoulders of giants who don't look like me. You know, there are many people who have no shared background with me who have made tremendous efforts toward all these things that I care about in life. So I don't fear representation. And like I told you, like I said earlier, you know, there's all these efforts to take back this representation. And I think it's silly. It's tragic. It's ugly, but it's just like mean. It's silly, because look at your story, man. Like, you don't have to make a career in history to have benefited from that time that you spent there, and or the curiosity that is sparked within you engaging in this content by seeing yourself in the past where you are from. I had all that, Richard, because I've got photographs on the walls of the going back generations, you know. Notwithstanding the fact you crack open a history book and, you know, you're going to see a lot of people that look like me in our era.
Yeah. You know, representation is interesting for me as well as identity. So, like, you know, Kimberly Crenshaw will tell us, you know, we're multiple things. We're intersectional. So we're multiple things. And so there's something interesting to me when I think of, you know, that I'm black, and I'm also a man, and I'm also someone who's a father, like all of these different labels that you know, my identities. The way in which how I've grown to be able to navigate them the way I do now is rooted in that work early on. And because there's something to be said about what does representation really look like when you as an individual are always changing, right? My skin complexion don't change, but Richard in 2026 is different than him in 2019, right? So when I was at Colonial Williamsburg, what I got to do was to be able to see Kate, Hannah, Sally, Sarah, you know, these individuals before the conversation was around enslaved people.
Names, the importance
and now
of...
we're talking about names, and because a lot of the work that we did was around, you know, in some ways character interpretation or acting, now we're also being fit with personalities and distinctions. I portrayed different characters in different scenes, so I had to make those people different. And for me, at a young age, it kind of put me into a place of thinking about people as part of a bigger identity and also individuals. And that's an interesting conversation that I come into all the time today. Because of the means, it's quick, it's easy. You're a white guy, so that means you do white guy stuff. This box that I have over here of all of the white guy stuff that people do, I'm now putting that on you without even realizing that, no, you don't do that crazy stuff them dudes over there do. Like, right? So there is that has been a really interesting thread for me over the years, is this sort of idea of, for me, what I was oriented to early on at age 10 that many others weren't oriented to, and how does that orientation speak directly to how I exist in the world today?
Right.
And I think, and in the end, and I'll stop there, is that if we can accept the fact that that history helped take a young shy kid to be able to openly and be vulnerable and as authentic as I can be, talk about, you know, the intersection of, you know, psychotherapy and mental health and emotions and history and, you know, behavioral science, to be able to combine those things, the history world helped shape who I became as a man, as a human being. And that, I don't think that was necessarily done intentionally. I mean, it was intentionally take care of us and those sorts of things. But imagine what happens if museums and historic sites and just in the field at large, if we knew that it's possible to change people's lives through our experiences, the history that we teach. Like, what does it look like when we're intentionally designing our experiences for that purpose?
All right, I'm going to zoom out on you, and I told you I was going to, because I'll give you, I maintain that our number one goal in these institutions is to connect people to humanity, period, end of story. And that's the only real measurable outcome we can do. We cannot prescribe learning. We've actually, probably Richard said, this is our third take on this conversation, y'all. And I have a feeling this is the third time that I've said this as part of this conversation, because I've struggled with this too. So he and I are museum historic site guys. Like, we make our business. We're museum project managers. We work on all kinds of stuff. And y'all have no idea how hard we spend, how much time we spend in that business thinking about y'all, thinking about how to best convey information to you through the resources we have. Often it's artifacts or a historic site. We spent inordinate, and in good ways. This was another big change that Richard and I inherited when we did this. The challenge I found, though, is you can lead the horse to water, but you cannot make them drink. You cannot prescribe what people are going to get out of it. And so the solution, the easiest solution, is to be as accessible as possible. Be as inclusive as possible. Create the sense of belonging, which is another term that you brought to me, because it really does sum up what we are trying to do when we are seeking to be inclusive. I'll just say my number one, easiest way to talk about this, it was a revelation to use it this way. Diversity is being invited to the dance. Inclusion is being asked to dance. And listen, I'm just going to say I have experience with being excluded. I have some real experience with it, and some stuff that makes me feel terrible every time I think about it. And I don't like exclusion. I don't like feeling excluded. And so I try very hard to be an inclusive human. And you put the frame on it as what we're trying to do is make people feel like they belong. That includes our staff, of course. You and I spent an inordinate amount of time in that space. Good time. That's what we do. But it also includes we find history liberating. Come here. Stewardship is the open hand. Come join us in the endeavor of it.
Yeah, I mean, there's something that I wrote down when you're talking about, and because I agree with you wholeheartedly, and I keep saying this, we can't prescribe change. What we do is we're intentional about the type of intentional in creating the conditions where change can happen.
Yeah. Yep.
And a lot of my language, and it's stumbling over it because I'm really starting to lean more and more now into from that extension from belonging. It's really about us setting the conditions and resetting so we can have capacity to manage and maintain those conditions.
Yep.
And so, to your point about belonging, I've started now, it's simple stuff like if I were to have a birthday party and if I wanted people to belong, what would I do to make them feel like they're in a space where they're supposed to be, that they're welcomed here, that they're going to be cared for, and we all gonna have a good time, like we all won. I'm thinking Earth, Wind, and Fire. And so the idea of and I'm also being careful with my words in that I can't make anyone feel belonging, but I can set the conditions so that belonging can happen. From my own experience, and I've said this several times, how many times when I was in Minnesota, and I went to Minnesota. When I was in Minnesota, I was a Virginian living in Minnesota. I even introduced myself that way. And because I was so against, I'm not assimilating to this culture. I'm from Virginia, from the South, right? Circling back to me, I had my identity right? I'm not losing who I am.
Well played, sir. Well played.
Right? And I think it was in the middle of doing a keynote where I noticed it and just said it right there on the spot. In Minnesota, I felt like I didn't belong. However, when I pause and create space between how I'm connecting myself with identities and whatnot and really think about the time that was there, well, I never allowed myself to belong because I was a Virginian. I had already signaled that I was only here temporarily around a community that was looking for permanence and help and support.
And that, one of the things I know about that, this is one of the best things about the Midwest. Their devotion to local history, to the local story is deep, and it's across the Midwest. It goes back to some of the founding of some of those states. That some of these institutions, Minnesota may be one of them, is written into the state constitution, and there is a palpable sense of creating community within the institutions there. And that is an inspiration to those of us who come from the South I will say myself included, where the creation of community in a place like the seven cities where you're from, where you have a whole bunch of transient population, people moving in and out because of the military, and because of the connection to DC. I was in Orlando, whole bunch of tourists come in, sucking all of the resources from the community, leaving the rest of us here to make something happen there.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm totally with you. And to go into that and say, I am not you, maybe in the South is a way to identify yourself. Hey guys, I'm not trying to be a Southerner or nothing. We kind of bring it to ourselves, and you're saying the job was no. It's not. We're not asking you to assimilate here, but e pluribus unum. Out of many, we are one.
Right, and this is how words matter, and even more so. I know I still have dope relationships there, but it was belonging externally is different than belonging internally. Like, it starts here. In my mind, I'm not Minnesotan. I'm Virginian. And I'm gonna be here probably for 7 years, and then I'm gonna head on. So with that mindset, I've already set myself up to not feel the type of belonging that the relational, set up. And that wasn't that somebody else did something to me. That was me doing it to myself. And so I'm really liking the idea of how, belonging is becoming more of a conversation point, and I'm eager to see us talk more about how belonging is about, on one end, I'm creating a space where you feel valued, seen, heard, welcomed. I'm being curious, I have my behaviors that are associated with that. But I couldn't see that until I saw that I was the obstacle to it happening in the first place.
Which is fundamentally back down to the human condition, right? Like be the change you wish to be in the world.
Yeah.
My father was got sober with Alcoholics Anonymous in the 70s and taught me the serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. That is as deep a theology in my being as Christian theology is where I was raised in the Christian church. The idea that today is the first day of the rest of your life was a mind-blowing concept. Today is the first day of the rest of your life was a mind-blowing concept to me when I first thought of it. And I was like 10, about the same age you were coming of age in the Williamsburg kind of thing. If we are here, to according to the two great commandments on the Christian side, love God and love your neighbor. The manifestation of that is loving your neighbor is creating a sense of belonging around you. That's where I stand. That's where I stand when it comes to building community. That is the hill I will die on. And I don't say that metaphorically. I do say it metaphorically. Thank God I say it metaphorically, right? Because my grandfather was willing to die on that hill in World War II. So I appreciate, to me, right, belonging is the condition that we can create ourselves in our hearts and with other people. You and I, choose also to do it through the institutions, which I think are very well positioned, those who are really thinking about this, to enter whatever phase we're going to be after the current nonsense is over. And it may be a long time, God knows. But when people are starting to want to come together, this desire that we always had, Minnesota Historical had, Orange County Regional History Center had, to be a place for the community to come together and create some sense of belonging. And sometimes it's as simple as putting out artifacts in a way to tell a good story and making a really inviting visitor experience. It's easy to park. It's easy to pay. It's not too cold. It's not too hot. People aren't rude.
Yeah. Well, I would say it goes even. There's another aspect of this that I'm actually pushing, and that is, when I have a costume on and I'm representing an organization, how I interact with people at the grocery store says something.
Yeah, for sure.
Right?
Sure.
There's something about the fact that the more that this work is functions or operates through a transactional approach, the more the goal kind of feels like it's out of range. We still trying to get there. There is something to be said about, like in all of this that we've talked about, like the stories we tell. Are we telling stories that create belonging, or are we telling stories that create distance? The stories that I tell myself, I created distance between me and Minnesotans just off the rip. And then naturally I had to navigate through that. I think there's something to be said about what happens when we shift from just a transactional sort of approach that we generally have to what does it mean to be in relationship? Like, what is our relationship to the stories and each other, and how do we navigate that in real time? Is something I'm thinking a lot about.
And remembering again the boundaries that come with it. For example, right? I am not going to say misogyny is okay, right? Or something like that, or homophobia is acceptable. Like that's just we're not going to talk about that then, because we have some irreconcilable differences. That's fine. I want to say, like, the stories we tell ourselves, the stories we say institutionally, Richard and I have a hard time sometimes navigating this line when we talk, because we have spent a lot of time in professional organizations, at conferences, really trying to make some big changes across our lives for the people that run these museums and historic sites and institutions that we've worked with and for. And, one of the keys of the Crossroads here is to bring to light where we find some of these solutions and where we can find community. And, all right, I got two more for you, because we got to kind of wrap this up. You mentioned intentionality a lot. So I want you to spend a little bit of time talking about that, intentionality yourself, how you do it, et cetera. And then I want you to wrap it up with, how do you find community? How do you seek it? What is community to you? This is just a big, important part of the lessons I want to bring here. You've mentioned a lot of this too, about learning and those things. So intentionality and community are where I want to leave us, and give you maybe 10 minutes at the most to wrap us up.
I'm thinking about intentionality through the lens it's the moment when I stop running the same story in my mind about what worked last time or how it's gonna be, and I'm really starting to choose very intentionally what it is that I'm trying to do. And for me, and like I said earlier, it's the difference between, like, I know I don't feel like I can change anybody except myself, and I know how hard that has been with me, right? So I have a bit of grace and accountability for how other people navigate that. But in terms of the work that I do, I'm really just I'm always asking myself, like, why am I doing this? And in the end, and shout out to Connie Graff and Randy Korn for, Randy's work around impact and intentionality, and Connie Graff's early influence on me, that in everything that I do, aside from now I'm asking what kind of ancestor will I be, but even along with that, when I'm communicating, when I'm presenting, when I'm writing, when I'm just existing amongst other people, I'm asking, what do I, as a result of my sharing with you all, what is it that I want you to know? What is it I want you to feel? What is it I want you to do? It's not saying that the know, feel, do are going to manifest, but it is saying that now I know where I'm coming from and how I'm
my goals
intentionally, like what I'll say and what I don't say. It sets my scope. And that has just changed my whole world, not just in terms of the history work that I do, but also just the means of which how I think about community. And I'm connecting to the piece that you were speaking about earlier. For me, community initially in my mind was about hanging out with everybody. It was a visual picture of being at the barbecue and everybody around and everybody eating, and we are in community. That's why Minnesota was difficult for me, because I didn't get invited to no barbecues in Minnesota. But what I didn't realize in Minnesota, and also now, was that I think about community in a very in a much more abstract way than I used to. Like I think about community through the conversations I have, the books that I read, um, the spaces that I exist in. You know, sometimes I'm challenged and sometimes I'm not, but I think of community in a much broader sort of sense now. Um, because in Earth School, I'm being influenced by everything, and everything that is in a sphere to touch me and to connect with me. I think about it in community. I also think that community shifts and grows, so it's not static. There's people who came to the community in 2019 and they're not here now. Okay, I don't. It's not that I say, well, you don't have time for me, or like it's not that. It's thinking about community as being more fluid, just as fluid as I now feel comfortable doing. So once I stopped feeling like I needed to be rigid and operate underneath of these labels in a certain way, then the way in which how I accepted what flow of life was became different. So you and I don't talk every day. We might catch up once every week, but you're a core to my community, right? There's people who I haven't talked to in 2 years, and I just decided I was going to send them a random message and about the new Michael Jackson movie coming out, because that's exciting to me. And now I've connected back with those people. There's still community. It's just how I think about community is much different now, and I find it everywhere I go. And when I'm by myself, I'm with the ancestors, I'm with the thoughts, and so I'm still in community.
Yeah, I'll highlight, my knowing you for decade plus now and working with you. Richard and we've done so much together, professionally, personally, written a whole bunch of stuff, made a whole bunch of good trouble in John Lewis's words, in the late John Lewis's words. But, I think what I hear you saying is, you seek it intentionally with intentionality. Thinking about beginning with the end in mind, like is one of the easiest things. Is what do you want to do? You brought meditation to me. I'm assuming you're still a regular meditator. I'll throw this out to the world, y'all, and I'm terrible at it because I always avoid it for some reason. But I have a couple go-to meditations on YouTube that are guided that have just saved my butt over the years. And what it does when you meditate is it clears your mind and your true intention does come out. Things become super clear, the path you need to take, the things you can avoid, etc. And for me, with ADHD, I couldn't just do a silent meditation. I needed a guided meditation to remind me somebody's there, so I don't get nervous that I'm going to fall asleep or not do my next thing. But Richard, you introduced meditation to me as a tool for getting your mind right for Earth School. I mean, that's, it's essentially what it is. If your true focus is, I want to be a good ancestor, how do I become a good ancestor? Let me pause about the moments I'm doing and think about that intentionality, how I go through.
I like the power of choice. If you come up in a culture where if you feel it, say it. That's how I kind of saw things. Like, well, if I feel mad, then I'm just gonna tell you I'm mad and I don't care. And I remember my mother telling me, she said, my mother and my grandmother both have said this. If you're upset about something, sleep on it for 24 hours. And then, act from there. And
my dad taught me the same thing, Richard.
Right?
Believe it or not. So
that kind of
I'm convinced Richard and I are we go really way farther back than just the last couple little bit. But no shit. Dad said that was a big thing for him. Like, hold off 24 hours.
Yeah.
Oh man, have I screwed that one up a lot.
Right. Well, see, here's the thing that I would say, and especially for people who are watching right now, because as someone who's navigated trauma, who coaches people through trauma and those sorts of things, that is one of the gifts that we have. And I can't overstate this. Meditation is like preparing you for the big game. So the big game, let's imagine the big game is this big argument that happens sometime in the future, and you have a choice. You can punch somebody in the throat. You can, in terms of how you navigate it. Meditation sets you up so that you can be the one making the choice rather than your emotions.
When the time comes.
When the time comes. So that's why I regulate. I mean, I went years doing it wrong. And then once I saw some YouTube clips, I was like, oh, I'm doing this wrong. I was thinking that I'm supposed to make my voice, make my thoughts stop. No. The issue is I just need to continue to be calm while the thoughts come and go. And so that taught me that I didn't have to react to everything that was happening. It created space so that I can now observe stuff and determine, do I even want to interact with that?
Right. That, you know, that gives you, right. That gives you that, yeah, the discernment, you know, they call it discernment. That's a wisdom thing straight out of the song, you know, Solomon's words, etc. And there's a lot, you know, there's a lot in there.
Yeah.
The wisdom in pausing, keeping, the Stoics talk about how keeping control of you and how you react. Meditation is one way that you have learned to do that and stay intentional about your daily life, your professional practice, your spiritual practice, and those things.
And can I just say one last thing?
Last thing. And then give me your identification so people can find you.
Oh, sure.
After that.
So the last thing that I'll say is I think there's a lot to be said about, like we said earlier, sitting with your feelings, sitting with your emotions. Meditation is my answer to how to sit with the feelings that I can now, and I don't have to get into a pose or anything. I can meditate while I'm walking, but it is just creating space so that I don't allow autopilot to take control. And the way that has shifted how I can have relationships with people has just been, I can now say I am a safe space. I might not be able to create a safe space elsewhere, but I can operate as one and be an asset to people. Richard.Josey at collectivejourneys.org is my email address, and I think you'll probably put that up.
Say that one again.
Did I say that right?
Richard.Josey.
Yeah, at collectivejourneys.org.
Collectivejourneys.org is the website.
Yep. And also goodancestors.org, all one word, is where you can find some of these flesh shirts and these t-shirts.
The swag. Get
we
yours.
might come out with the mugs too. I don't know, but we're working on it. But just really trying to get people to have a conversation and send some money back out to Dakota because that's where it came from for me.
That's awesome. Richard, appreciate you being here. We tried so hard. Hopefully the third time's a charm. I'm going to stop the video and then we'll talk